Would you obey an order like this? Your brother betrayed the city, so no one is allowed to bury him. Anyone who tries to lay him to rest will be punished. But what if that person was the last one in the world? You could still call family? The story of Antigone is very old, and yet it feels strangely close to us. It does not feel distant. It does not feel like something sealed away in the past. It feels painfully familiar. At its heart, this is not just a grand tragic tale. It is a deeply human question. When someone you love is gone, do you obey the law, or do you stay loyal to the person? Most of us, in one form or another, keep running into that question. Picture the scene for a moment. A war has just ended. Dust still hangs over the city. Fear is still sitting in people's hearts. One side speaks of victory. The other speaks of betrayal. And right in the middle of it stands a young woman. The king gives an order. That man is a traitor. No one is to touch him. No one is to mourn him. No one is to place him in the ground. This, he says, is for order. For the good of the city. For the sake of the law. But that man is Antigone's brother. That is the moment this story stops being a debate and starts hitting you in the chest. Which word do you hear? First, traitor, or brother? That one difference changes everything. To the king, he is the man who came against the city. To Antigone, he is family. He is someone she was born beside, someone who endured the same broken house. The same curse, the same grief. The world may call him an enemy. Antigone still calls him her brother. Antigone is the daughter of Oedipus. Yes, that Oedipus. Her family has already been through ruin, shame, and pain. And now her two brothers, Eteocles and Polynices, have fallen in conflict against each other. One fought for the city. The other came against it. Creon, now king, draws a hard line between them. One is honored. The other is condemned. One is given a farewell. The other is denied even that. A law meant to rule the living now reaches all the way into the final dignity of the dead. At this point, a lot of people side with Antigone right away. It feels obvious. No matter what someone did, shouldn't they at least be allowed some kind of final peace? And if it is your own family, doesn't that make it even clearer? The first time I came across this story, that was my reaction too. It felt simple. Too simple, almost. How is there even a debate here? But what makes this tragedy so powerful is that the more you look at it, the harder it becomes to dismiss Creon completely. Creon does not see himself as cruel. In his own mind, he is protecting the city. After conflict, the thing a ruler fears most is chaos. He believes that if a traitor is not punished, the law becomes weak. And if the law becomes weak, the city begins to fall apart. He believes that the moment private feelings rise above public order, a ruler stops being a ruler. And if we are honest, that kind of logic does not sound unfamiliar. We have heard versions of it before. Rules are rules. If you make one exception, everything starts to break. That is why Creon is not just a simple villain. He speaks in a voice that still carries weight. A voice that still wins arguments. But Antigone does not give in to that logic for even a second. She says there is something older than the king's command. Something deeper than the law of the moment. To her, no ruler has the right to erase the basic duty owed to someone who has died. In simple words, this is what she means. There is a line a human being should not cross. And if the law crosses that line, then the law itself has lost its claim. I do not think Antigone makes this choice just because she is brave. Brave is not enough to explain her. She is too clear, too absolute, too unwilling to bend. There is something almost frightening about her certainty. She could have looked for a safer path. She could have stayed quiet. She could have pretended to obey and kept her grief to herself. But she does not choose any of those things. She does not stop at feeling that the law is wrong. She acts. And she is willing to pay for that action with everything. That is why Antigone is not just a good person in a sad story. She is a tragic person. Someone who is so sure of what matters that she would rather be broken than betray it. And that is where the story becomes even more painful. Antigone has a sister, Ismene. Ismene tells her they cannot fight the king. They have to survive. At first, that can sound weak. It can sound like fear talking, but if we are honest, Ismene may be the one most of us understand more easily. Most of us are closer to Ismene than to Antigone. We can know something is wrong. We can know someone we love is being treated unfairly. But when power stands in front of us, large and cold and impossible to move, our bodies often freeze before our principles speak. We stay quiet. We do not act. We choose survival, not always because we are bad, but because we are afraid. That is exactly why Antigone stands out. She does what most people cannot. In the end, she scatters dust over her brother's body. Not a grand funeral, not some huge act of rebellion, just a handful of dust. And yet that small act shakes the authority of the king. That is one of the most striking things in this whole story. Not a weapon, not an army, just a handful of dust. Power usually announces itself loudly, but sometimes what unsettles it most is something small, quiet, and deeply personal. Antigone does not come across like someone trying to overthrow the whole system. If anything, her act feels intensely private. She simply wants to honor her brother. She wants to give him the dignity of a final goodbye. But that private grief crashes straight into public power. And that is where the story gets its depth. Creon refuses to let her go unpunished. In his mind, a law that can be broken without consequence is no law at all. More than that, he believes that if his authority cracks, the city will crack with it. So he gives Antigone a sentence she cannot come back from. And this is where the tragedy tightens around everyone. We start asking the question that always comes too late. Did it really have to go this far? That is the terrible thing about pride in stories like this. People often realize they were wrong only after they have already destroyed too much. Creon has someone he loves too. His son, Haemon, loves Antigone. He pleads with his father to listen, to hear what people are saying, to understand that being king does not mean you are right about everything. I have always found this part especially painful, because it feels like the story still offers one last chance. If someone had softened just a little, if someone had stepped back just a little sooner, maybe some of this loss could have been avoided. But Creon is late. As people in tragic tales so often are, he is too late. By the time he changes his mind, Antigone is already gone. Haemon collapses under the weight of it. Then Creon's wife loses all light in her life as well. What began as a command, meant to protect order, ends up tearing apart his own home. That is the sharp paradox at the center of this story. The man trying to preserve order brings the greatest destruction. The woman trying to stay loyal to family becomes the one who breaks the law. The words meant to protect the city destroy the house of the man who speaks them. And the act meant to honor someone who is gone ends up shaking the lives of everyone still living. That is why Antigone is not the kind of story you can reduce to one easy lesson. It does not leave you with a neat answer. It leaves you uncomfortable. It does not only ask who was right, it asks why human beings can be driven apart, even by the things they believe are right. Even so, I think the story keeps its light on Antigone longer than it does on Creon. And the reason is simple. Creon's law belongs to a moment. Antigone's grief belongs to something much deeper in us. Power always dresses itself in the language of its own time. But the feeling that you cannot simply abandon someone you love, that feeling lasts much longer. Antigone matters to us not because she is perfect. She matters because her choice begins from something painfully human. I cannot turn away from my brother. That simple feeling stays with us more than all the speeches about order and authority. Every time I return to this story, it makes me think about what it really means to be human. We often say that law is necessary, and that is true. Without law, things fall apart. But law is not the whole answer. Law can create order. It cannot feel grief for us. Law can protect a city. It cannot say goodbye for us. That is why we cannot live on law alone. And we cannot live on emotion alone either. What Antigone shows us is that a good life is often lived on the tight rope between those two things. We cannot throw away the world of rules. And we cannot casually abandon the people we love. But sometimes, a moment comes when we are forced to choose. And that is when a person's depth is revealed. What are you willing to lose for what you believe must be protected? What will you refuse to betray, even when the cost is high? That, to me, is one of the deepest human questions in this whole story. People are not beautiful only when they are right. Sometimes they become most fully themselves when they refuse to betray what matters most to them. That is why this tragedy still speaks to us. It keeps asking the same hard questions. Can the law be wrong? How far can power go in telling us what grief is allowed to look like? When does love stand higher than obedience? And maybe the most painful question of all is this one. If the world ordered me to turn away from someone I truly love, what kind of person would I become? Antigone does not save the city. She does not win. She does not walk away with triumph. She leaves. She loses. On the surface, it may seem like she gains nothing. And yet, when the story is over, it is her name that stays with us more than the name of power. Maybe that is because people remember the face of loyalty longer than the voice of authority. So Antigone is not just a woman who breaks the law. She is the person who asks us a question we may never be fully ready to answer. Will you choose the safe side of what looks right? Or will you stay with the human side of what feels impossible to abandon? And that question feels so unsettling because one day, in some form, we may all face it. Not in a grand mythic city. Not in some distant world. Maybe just in a family. In a friendship. In a room where staying silent would be easier. We move between small versions of Creon and small versions of Antigone all the time. And when that moment comes, this old story seems to turn toward us and ask one last thing. Whose name will you keep calling when the world tells you to let go?